Vlad and Henrik worked the same shift at the industrial plant on the edge of a gray European town. Vlad operated a press that stamped metal plates, and Henrik worked the evening cleaning crew after his morning shift at the butcher shop. They had known each other for 12 years, having met originally at a union meeting that never led to anything but friendship. One cold November evening, they took their usual shortcut through the alley behind the old textile warehouse. The alley had no lights, only the dim reflection from a distant street lamp. Vlad walked ahead, his boots splashing in shallow puddles, and Henrik followed carrying a small bag with 2 sandwiches wrapped in butcher paper. Then they heard a sharp noise first, a kind of wet thud followed by a gasp. Then they saw him. A man in a dark coat and a knitted mask stood over another man who lay crumpled against the brick wall. The standing man held a knife with a thin blade, still raised. The man on the ground tried to raise an arm, but his hand fell back into a pool of liquid that reflected the faint light. Vlad froze, and Henrik grabbed Vlad's shoulder, pulling him backward into a recessed doorway. From that dark corner, they watched the masked man crouch over the body, pat the pockets of the bleeding man, and then stand up quickly. As he turned to flee, something small and metallic fell from his coat pocket. It hit the cobblestones with a soft clink, but the killer did not notice. He ran toward the far end of the alley and disappeared around a corner. Vlad and Henrik remained still for what felt like 10 minutes. They heard no sirens and no footsteps, only the distant hum of a factory exhaust fan. Finally, Henrik crept forward. The victim no longer moved. Henrik knelt and picked up the object. It was a keychain shaped like a small shield, made of silver with an engraved inscription in Old German script. Henrik could not read it, but he knew it was not cheap. He put it in his pocket without a word. Vlad whispered that they should call the police from the phone booth on the next street, but Henrik shook his head. He pointed at the victim's face. Even in the dim light, Vlad recognized the man. It was Ernst Kohler, a lawyer known for defending half the business owners in town. But everyone also whispered that Kohler had connections to the black market arms trade that ran through the nearby port. Henrik spoke very quietly, saying that anyone who saw this would be in danger. Vlad agreed reluctantly. They left the alley the same way they came, avoiding the main road, and walked in silence back to Vlad's small house near the rail yard. Henrik poured 2 glasses of cheap vodka from a bottle on the shelf. They sat at the kitchen table, and Henrik placed the keychain between them. The inscription read, in archaic German, "Loyalty beyond the grave." Henrik turned the keychain over, and on the back a date was scratched, August 15, 1994. Henrik said it looked like a memento from a military unit or a secret society. Vlad felt a cold knot in his stomach and suggested they throw it into the river. Henrik refused, arguing that the killer might come looking for it, and if they had nothing to bargain with, they would be killed anyway. Keeping the keychain gave them leverage. Vlad did not like the logic, but he could not find a better argument. They decided to hide it in Henrik's locked toolbox at the slaughterhouse, where no one would think to search. 3 days passed, and nothing happened. Then on the 4th morning, Vlad arrived at the factory to find 2 men in suits waiting for him at the entrance. They did not identify themselves. One of them asked Vlad where he was on the night of November 12th. Vlad said he was home alone. The man smiled and said that was convenient. Then he leaned close and whispered that Vlad should remember that lying was a bad habit. The men left without another word. Vlad called in sick and ran to the slaughterhouse, where he found Henrik already there, pale and shaking. A similar pair of men had visited Henrik's apartment the previous night. They had not asked questions. They had simply told Henrik that a package had been lost, and that the person who found it should return it to the post office on Maple Street by Friday. There was no post office on Maple Street. It was a code, and Henrik had heard it used by local criminals, meaning return what you took or pay the price. Vlad wanted to go to the police station, but Henrik laughed bitterly. He reminded Vlad that the police chief played cards every Friday with the factory owner, the same factory owner who had ties to Ernst Kohler's legal practice. They were trapped. Henrik pulled the keychain from his pocket. He had brought it back from the toolbox because he no longer trusted any lock. He examined the inscription again. That night, they decided to learn what the keychain truly opened. They went to the town library, the only quiet place left. Henrik found a book on German regimental markings, but the inscription did not match any known unit. However, the date, August 15, 1994, was the same date that a local shipping magnate, Otto Brenner, had died in a boating accident. Otto Brenner had been investigated for arms smuggling but never charged. His son, Klaus Brenner, now ran the family business from a large warehouse near the docks. Vlad remembered hearing that Klaus Brenner had a reputation for cruelty, and he also remembered that Ernst Kohler had been Otto Brenner's lawyer. The connection was too clear. The masked killer had been working for Klaus Brenner, and the keychain had belonged to Otto. It was a sentimental trophy, perhaps taken from the dead father and kept by the son as a reminder of loyalty. Now it was lost, and Klaus Brenner wanted it back. Vlad and Henrik had stumbled into a war they never asked for. They spent the rest of the night at Vlad's kitchen table trying to think of a way out. Moving away was impossible because both had elderly parents in town. Giving up the keychain meant losing their only shield, and going to the authorities was suicide. Henrik finally proposed a desperate plan. They would not return the keychain. Instead, they would use it to expose Klaus Brenner's connection to the murder. But how, without evidence? Vlad remembered the alley had a small window on the second floor of the warehouse. Someone could have been watching, and someone might have seen the killer's face. It was a thin hope, but it was all they had. Over the next 2 weeks, Vlad and Henrik lived in constant fear. They stopped taking their usual routes, varied their arrival times at work, and Henrik began carrying a heavy wrench in his coat pocket. Vlad bought a padlock for his bedroom door, yet no one approached them directly again. That silence was worse than any threat. On a rainy Tuesday, Vlad noticed a black car parked across from his house for 3 hours. The windows were tinted, and the engine never turned off. When Vlad walked toward it, the car drove away slowly, as if the driver wanted Vlad to see the license plate. Vlad wrote down the number, but he knew it would lead nowhere. That night, Henrik came to Vlad with news from the slaughterhouse. One of his co-workers, a man named Stefan, had been found beaten in the parking lot. Stefan had not been robbed, he had been warned. Stefan often worked late and walked home past the alley where Kohler died, so someone thought Stefan might have seen something. Stefan had not, but the beating sent a clear message to everyone in the neighborhood: keep your mouth shut. Henrik realized that the killers were not just looking for the keychain, they were eliminating any possible witnesses. Vlad and Henrik were already marked. The only reason they were still alive was that the killers did not know which of them had the keychain. The black car visits and the subtle threats were meant to make one of them break and reveal the hiding place. Henrik decided to stop being passive. He took a day off work and traveled to the county records office 2 towns over. There, he requested all public documents related to Otto Brenner's death. The clerk gave him a thin file. The boating accident had been ruled as drowning due to rough weather, but the file contained a handwritten note from a harbor master, now retired. The note mentioned that Otto Brenner's boat had been found with a deep gash on the hull, consistent with a collision. No other boat was ever reported damaged. Henrik copied the note onto a scrap of paper. He also found a photograph of the keychain that Otto Brenner had been known to carry, and it was identical to the one in Henrik's pocket. That night, Henrik showed Vlad his findings. Vlad argued that this still proved nothing, since a keychain could be bought anywhere. Henrik agreed, but he had another idea. The keychain did not just open a lock, it opened a small compartment in Otto Brenner's old desk, which was now in Klaus Brenner's office. Henrik knew this because he had once delivered meat to the Brenner warehouse and had seen the desk in a glass display case. The keychain was a ceremonial object, and only two existed. One was buried with Otto, according to the funeral records. The other was the one Henrik held. If they could find a way to prove that the keychain came from Klaus Brenner's possession, they could tie him to the murder scene. But they needed a confession. Vlad suggested a simple trap. They would write an anonymous letter to Klaus Brenner saying that the keychain would be returned if Brenner met them alone at the old warehouse alley at midnight. But instead of going themselves, they would hide a portable tape recorder nearby. Vlad shook his head, remembering that the killer might check for wires. Then Vlad had a better idea. There was a half-blind watchman who sat in a booth at the entrance of the textile warehouse. The watchman, an old man named Pavel, could not see well, but his hearing was excellent. If Pavel was present in his booth during the meeting, he could identify voices. And Pavel owed Henrik a favor, because Henrik had given him free scraps of meat for his dog for 2 years. Henrik visited Pavel that evening, and Pavel agreed to listen. However, he refused to testify in court, he was too afraid. Henrik said that was fine. They just needed Pavel to confirm what was said so that Vlad and Henrik would know if Brenner admitted to the murder. The plan moved forward. Henrik wrote the letter using a typewriter at the library and signed it the finder. He dropped it in a mailbox addressed to Klaus Brenner at the warehouse. They waited 3 anxious days. On the 4th day, a reply arrived at Vlad's address. Someone had slipped an envelope under his door containing a single sentence, "Midnight, Friday, no weapons, bring the item." Henrik's hands shook as he read the note. Friday was 2 days away. They prepared carefully. Henrik would go to the meeting because Vlad had a tendency to stutter when scared. Vlad would hide in the watchman's booth with Pavel, and Pavel would keep the window cracked open. Henrik would wear a thick coat and keep the keychain in his left pocket. He would not hand it over until Klaus Brenner answered one question: "Why did you kill Ernst Kohler?" On Friday, the rain returned. Vlad and Pavel sat in the cramped booth, lights off, listening to the sound of water dripping from the roof. At midnight, Henrik walked into the alley from the south end. A tall figure in a dark coat emerged from the north end. The figure wore no mask this time, and it was not Klaus Brenner. It was a woman. She wore her gray hair in a tight bun and carried an umbrella. Henrik recognized her. She was Marta Brenner, Klaus's mother and the widow of Otto. She stopped 10 feet from Henrik and spoke in a voice like gravel. She said she had come alone because Klaus did not know about the letter, she had intercepted it. She told Henrik that the keychain belonged to her. Otto had given it to her on their wedding day, but she had lost it years ago. Then Klaus had found it and kept it as a memento after Otto died. Then she admitted the truth, she had been the one to hire the man who killed Ernst Kohler. Kohler had stolen documents proving that Otto's boat had been sabotaged by a rival arms dealer, and Kohler had used those documents to blackmail Marta for years. She had finally run out of patience. Henrik stood frozen. He had expected a violent confrontation, not a confession. Marta Brenner asked for the keychain back and promised that if Henrik gave it to her, she would pay him a large sum and ensure that no one ever bothered him or Vlad again. Henrik looked toward the watchman's booth. Vlad and Pavel had heard everything, and Pavel silently nodded. Henrik turned back to Marta and said he would think about it. He walked away, leaving her standing in the rain. That night, the three men debated what to do. Pavel wanted to forget everything. Vlad wanted to go to the police with the confession. Henrik wanted to wait for proof. But they had no recording, only Pavel's word, and Pavel would never testify. They seemed doomed to accept Marta's offer. Henrik could not sleep for 2 nights. He kept turning the keychain over in his fingers, reading the inscription, "Loyalty beyond the grave." It was an oath for people who kept secrets forever, but Henrik decided that some secrets should not be kept. On Monday morning, he went to the warehouse district and found the address of a journalist who wrote for the regional newspaper. The journalist's name was Lena Gross, and she had a reputation for publishing stories that the police ignored. Henrik did not have any proof to give her, only a story and a keychain. Lena listened to him for an hour in her small office, taking notes but promising nothing. After Henrik left, Lena made her own inquiries. She discovered that the watchman, Pavel, had spoken to a neighbor about what he heard, and the neighbor had told 2 friends. Word was spreading. Lena wrote an article without naming Henrik or Vlad. She described the murder of Ernst Kohler, the missing keychain, and the confession made by Marta Brenner in the presence of a witness. She published the article 2 days later on the front page, and the town erupted. People who had been silent for years began talking. A former employee of the Brenner warehouse came forward with records of illegal shipments. The police, under pressure from the regional prosecutor, finally raided the Brenner home. They found the documents that Kohler had stolen, and they also found a hidden safe containing the knife used in the murder, wrapped in a cloth with Marta Brenner's fingerprints. Marta was arrested. Klaus Brenner fled the country but was caught at the border. Henrik received a letter from Lena Gross thanking him for the tip, and she enclosed a small bank check as payment for the keychain, which Henrik had left with her as evidence. The keychain was later returned to the police as part of the trial. Vlad and Henrik testified from behind a screen, and their faces were never shown. The court convicted Marta Brenner of conspiracy to commit murder and sentenced her to 15 years. Klaus received a lesser sentence for obstruction and arms trafficking. The factory owner who had threatened Vlad lost his license when the investigation revealed his ties to the Brenner network. Vlad kept his job, but Henrik decided to leave the slaughterhouse. He used the money from the check to open a small repair shop for farm equipment on the edge of town, and Vlad visited him every Saturday. They never spoke about the alley again. One evening, 6 months later, Henrik received a package in the mail. It was a small wooden box, and inside, resting on black velvet, was the silver keychain. A note accompanied it, written in formal script, saying that the court had released the item to the only person who had shown integrity. Henrik read the inscription one last time, "Loyalty beyond the grave." He closed the box and put it in a drawer, not showing it to Vlad. Some things were better left unseen. Their lives returned to a quiet rhythm. Vlad married a woman who worked at the bakery, and Henrik adopted a dog, naming it after a long-forgotten German word he found in a book. The town rebuilt the alley into a small park with benches and lampposts, and children played there on sunny afternoons. No one remembered the bloodstains on the cobblestones, except for 2 old friends who never walked that way again. The story of the keychain faded into local legend, told by grandparents as a warning about the price of silence. Vlad and Henrik grew old and died within a year of each other. Vlad went first from a weak heart, then Henrik from a stroke while fixing a tractor. Their graves were placed side by side in the cemetery on the hill. The groundskeeper noticed that someone had left a small silver object on Henrik's tombstone one morning, and it looked like a keychain. But when he returned with a broom, it was gone. What mattered was not the object itself but the truth it had carried, and the truth had finally set them free. No detective solved the case, and no technology recorded the confession. Only human voices in a dark alley, and the courage of a butcher and a factory worker who refused to sell their silence.